I'm Sonia Baghdady, and here are some of our favorite moments from Advocate Now. Well, Anasa, you're a cultural strategist, a writer, director, and producer, and you focus on the future of culture. So I want to start with what might seem like a basic question, but how would you define culture?
Oh, that's my favorite question. I love that question because so often people collapse conversations about creativity, art making, imagination, and culture, and they're really all very different things. For me, culture is like the social agreements that we make that dictate everything that we do, how we greet each other, how we educate ourselves, how we eat, how we dress, and they're all really dictated by a set of core values that we hold at the center of our society.
Well, you've been pretty open about your childhood. You said that your family culture taught you that you would succeed because you were a Black girl, not in spite of it. How
That's
did
right.
that belief system, how would you say that shaped your life?
It's literally shaped everything about me. Um, I think it's the most powerful part about my childhood, and that, not only did I get that message, but I also got a message that was like, you can do anything if you take the time to figure it out and you keep moving and you understand what courage looks like, then you can do anything. And so many things in my life don't make sense. There are things that I shouldn't have been able to do or that I shouldn't have even tried, honestly. And, because I have a certain amount of like, how people talk about privilege in our lives, like that's a privilege to be someone who is raised to believe that anything is possible. And it's very countercultural. It's not just countercultural for Black girls growing into Black women, but it's really countercultural for all of us to be able to be told, like, the impossible is possible.
Well, we usually tend to see a dominant culture, whether we're talking about the arts, social institutions, values. How would you say the dominant culture affects minority groups?
The stories that we tell ourselves about who we are based on the color we are or not, the gender we are or not, insert there we are or not, is defines and shapes and dictates the possibility in people's lives, like their actual everyday human lives are dictated by the stories that we are holding as a group. And it's important for us, if we want to see the world be different, for us to figure out what those stories are that we're telling, because many of them are so subconscious that we're not even aware that we're telling ourselves those stories, and then figure out what it will take for us to transform those stories in the public space while we're doing them for ourselves, because no story is going to change for all of us unless it can change for each of us individually. And so being able to identify those stories and be able to remind yourself that they are not true and something else is possible in the story world, that is the only way you can actually apply it in real life.
Well, Sarah, you're a director at the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, which is the nation's public-private partnership for preventing suicide. Tell me about some of the work that you're focusing on right now.
Yeah, so thanks for, first of all, highlighting this really important issue. The Action Alliance is a committed group of national leaders from across the public and private sector who have come together with an express purpose of advancing the national strategy for suicide prevention. So it's a group that recognizes that no one organization or area of our society can be successful in isolation. So they've come from federal government, media and entertainment, sports, construction, faith, public safety, veteran serving groups, you name it, to really roll up their sleeves and amplify impact using a shared approach to move the work forward.
And the National Action Alliance is working with more than 250 partners across the US. Why is it so important that public and private groups work together to advance the national strategy for suicide prevention?
When it comes to suicide, every sector, every organization, every community, every person has a role to play. And we can't just stop working when we're focusing on preventing death. We have to be moving towards building communities that are worth living in and addressing despair. And that takes all of us at every level really coming together. So that's why we see a role for absolutely everyone in every organization.
And the Alliance is focused on three main priority areas to reduce suicide rates. One priority is changing the conversation around suicide prevention. What exactly does that mean, and what changes need to be made?
So how we talk about suicide really matters. It can shape a narrative of shock and despair and crisis, or it can provide hope and strength and offer stories of recovery. Most folks don't realize that over 90% of people who survive a suicide attempt do not go on to die by suicide. Millions of Americans have thoughts of suicide every year, but millions of Americans don't die, thankfully. And the hope is that the more that we talk about suicide and despair and being human, the less alone people will face in those dark times. And so how we talk about suicide can either create an open door to the conversation and support folks in a time of need, or it can further isolate and blame or stigmatize the very real pain that people are experiencing and create additional unnecessary barriers to reaching out for help. So when we're saying we're changing the conversation, it's really about engaging the community in the solution and ensuring that we all see that we have a role to play. And we all experience, the risk factors that can lead to suicidal despair.
And I want to talk more about the gender disparity in the sexual healthcare system. For example, there are only 2 FDA-approved treatments for sexual dysfunction in women. There are 26 for men. Can you shed some light on the reasoning for this?
Yeah, so there is a lot of reason for gender disparity. So I mentioned time. I mentioned provider bias. Historically, if you look, most OBGYNs were male, and they looked at women for 2 objective outcomes. One was for childbearing, and the second was sexual pleasure, not for themselves, but for their male partners. And so there is a provider bias, there's a funding disproportion. And even though female providers outnumber men in the workforce in healthcare, we don't outnumber them in those decision-making rooms. And then I mentioned that profound lack of education. 93% of medical students are graduating without enough knowledge to take care of menopausal patients, and less than 20% of OBGYNs are trained in sexual health care. And so when you combine all of these factors, we have this huge gender gap, particularly in healthcare, but particularly with sexual health care.
And of course, when there's a lack of proper care and attention, many patients can end up feeling frustrated, dismissed, and overlooked. Do you have any examples of that you can share with us?
Oh my God, I have patients who I did a TEDx talk about this, and I called them invisible patients. So I have 2 examples. I have a woman who drove 2 days to come see me. She was a stroke survivor, but her marriage was on the rocks because she had no desire. And she went to multiple doctors, and they told her, just be thankful to be alive. Like, who cares about your sex life? And they would never, ever say that to her husband, right? He would have 26 options available to him. And so when she came to us, we were able to find her a medication that she was a candidate for that was non-hormonal, wouldn't increase her risk of blood clot or stroke. And the next time I saw her, it was the first time I met her, she was in tears and crying and felt invisible and dismissed, and they're happily married. One more example, I had a patient who I did not get before the marriage ended, 9 years of sexual pain, and was just told, drink some wine and you'll be fine. You need to put your big girl panties on and just have sex with him. And I was her 9th doctor. And by the time she got to me, I gave her a diagnosis, genitourinary syndrome of menopause, and we gave her a vaginal suppository. And within 6 weeks, she no longer was having sexual pain. She was on to the next relationship, but she sat and she cried with me because she said, if only someone had told me and my partner that I wasn't rejecting him, that I was having physical changes, anatomic changes that were out of my control, that rendered sex so painful that I no longer wanted to have sex with the man that I loved. And it just makes me so sad because it was so avoidable.
I'm Sonia Baghdady. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com.